and then turn it off once they start.
Okay.
Okay, thank you for joining us tonight for our study session. We have 2 items on the agenda. The first is a presentation by management partners regarding the City of Norman Development Review Process improvements. And with that, I will turn it over to our city manager to introduce management partners.
Thank you, Your Honor. Management partners to evaluate the development processes undertaken by the City of Norman for commercial, residential, and industrial development. And it was a very involved process. We did receive wonderful participation from city staff. And city staff, if you're in the room and participated in this Management Partners program, please raise your hand for us. Thank you very much. I greatly appreciate your participation. There's a set of boards in the back that kind of flow chart what the development process actually entails, and we're not expected to read it from here, but it is available just for folks in the audience to walk through. With us tonight from Management Partners, we have Amy Paul and Jerry Newfarmer. And Jerry Newfarmer and I go back, way back when he decided he would become a recovering city manager and now works in the private sector. But he was a city manager in Fresno, California, about 30 miles north of my old stomping ground. So welcome to Norman, Mr. Newfarmer. I'll turn it over to Jerry and Amy.
Thank you, Darrell, Madam Mayor, members of council. It's good to be with you this evening and share the results of this work. I'm told that this is up on the screen, and that if I punch the right button, something will happen. Look at that. And do you all have screens in front of you so you can see what's going on here? Well, okay, that's good. So we're queued up and ready to go. Well, we appreciate the opportunity to be here this evening and kind of have an opportunity to make this presentation. The first slide lays out the agenda of the topics that we'll cover in the course of the presentation. I'm going to do the introductory part and kind of the overview, and then hand it off to Amy Paul, who is our project manager and who spent time on site working through the details of the project itself. I do want to make a general comment about doing this kind of work. The development review process is probably the most complex business process that the city has. It involves multiple departments with different professional interests, different professional responsibilities. But if you're a developer and you want to build something, you want to make an investment in the community, you want to build something, at some point you come to the city and you say, I want to build something. And you turn in the forms that the city requires. And at some point down the road, after all the work that the city does to take a look at that, the city says, okay. That's the business process in its entirety from a customer's perspective. And so a real goal at the staff level is to exercise their professional responsibilities, each in their own unique professional discipline, to do that part of the review that they have to do. But they're working together in a common business process. And because there are so many hands in the soup, as it were, the complexity gets in the way. And so the thing just bogs down over time. And then what happens is leadership changes at the middle management level, at the management level, different ideas get expressed, some issue pops up and you implement a bunch of new rules. And so over time, you kind of get arterial sclerosis of the business process. And so doing this kind of initiative is a rare opportunity to try and fix it. And so that's the goal. That's the goal of this undertaking. we structured this process in a way that is designed to include staff at all levels. And I'll get to that in a moment. First, I want to just mention a little bit about management partners. We do this kind of work with local governments all across the country. Our specialty is local governments. You mentioned that I served as a city manager at one point in the distant past, Darrell. The reality is that all of our professional staff have served in local government one way or another over time. And that doesn't make them good consultants. They have to learn how to listen to become good consultants. But we think that because of that experience, that professional background, that our staff is uniquely positioned to hear the issues from a staff perspective, to bring reasonable solutions of best business practices to the table and make some good recommendations. So that's a little bit about management partners. We've been in business for 25 years. We've done work in local governments all across the United States. And Norman is not the first city in the state of Oklahoma where we've done work either, I might just add. The methodology for this project consists of the steps outlined in this slide. We have our team come in and meet with your managers and key staff at all levels to understand what the work is that each participating business unit does, how they do it, and get a sense of that in relation to what we know to be best practices. We map the process, and that's the reason for the little display at the back of the room. Because if you really want to understand the business process, you need to know each step of the way and who does what and in what sequence. And that, we want to put the maps up on at least a little display anyway, so you can appreciate the complexity of it, because what you'll see in different tiers across are different departmental responsibilities, but it's the same common process from beginning to end. And so creating process maps, doing that kind of analytical work, sets the stage for going forward with the analysis. The other thing that's really important is to get feedback from the people who use the process. And we do that in a structured way. We go out and we do interviews individually of people who participate as users of the process to understand their perspective. And we pick up their ideas. And I'll hit the highlights of those in just a moment. But I want to make a comment about their perspective and their ideas and the trade-offs that are involved from a staff perspective. And this is the hard part. Staff takes its responsibility seriously to implement the rules and regulations of the law that they're required to implement. So in a real sense, staff has an enforcement responsibility. We want to make sure that your development proposal meets the standards that are established. At the same time, if the person across the counter wants to have reasonably quick service, I mean, give me good service and tell me what I got to do and give me good service and so on. So there's a trade-off between a demand for customer friendliness, customer responsiveness, customer service, and enforcement of the rules and the laws. The differentiation that we make is that when the city adopts its codes, its policies, in so doing, it sets the policies in place. It sets the parameters. The staff's responsibility is to adhere to those and to execute those with briskness and professionalism, and as much consistency as it's humanly possible to muster, to get to a good conclusion. So there's a tension that's there, but once at the staff level you understand that the policies that are being applied are policies that are adopted in public, in a public session, and are spelled out in writing, then your job is to execute them, execute being the key word, in an appropriate professional fashion. So that's a key distinction that I wanted to draw. And when we talk with the customers, we get their perception on the process. We then look at other jurisdictions, how they're doing it. We do a comparative analysis, which we did here. Prepared a separate little paper on that, getting data from peer jurisdictions that do the same thing, where there's some comparability. And then we do the observations and we do recommendations. And we bring those forward. And then we constitute a GE workout team. And the team is composed of frontline associates of the city, frontline city employees who do this work every day, day in and day out. And they're given goals. We want to improve customer service. We want to improve cycle time, how long it takes to get through. Those are the goals. Here's the detailed process map. Here are some of the recommendations that Management Partners has identified. And your job, and we're going to take management out of the room, your job, because you do the work every day, is to tell us, we're going to come back in a few days, and you're going to tell us what we need to do to accomplish those goals. So the staff engagement is powerful and intense and intentionally that way. And that's the reason we use that particular technique. So that's a key part of this methodology. You know, so often there are really good people who do consulting, who get hired to come in and study a development review process. And they come in and do a study and write up a nice report with 342 recommendations. That was the exact number in the Kansas City study, Darrell. And say, here, there you go, and then they leave. And the problem with that is, unless there's a structured way to engage the people that actually do the work and actually make some decisions in the course of doing so, you're going to get some of it done, but not all. And so that's the reason we do the GE workout component of the process, to try and see if we can't get past that kind of a barrier. Well, let me move on a little bit and talk about the as-is map. That's what's on the back of the room. I'm going to skip doing that in any kind of detail and talk about the customer interviews that we do. We made a point of trying to interview key selected users of the process, knowledgeable people who represent different business perspectives, planners, architects, engineers, developers, and to individually understand what they think about the process, what they see that works well, and what they see that could be improved. This little slide details some of the highlights about what works well, and this information is all provided to the manager as a separate item. And the next slide identifies those things that need improvement. So that's an important dimension of this. What's really, I think, in a big picture level significant is the council's decision to fund this initiative, to help the city staff, to provide a basis for the city staff to improve how the development process works. The council has an important role in setting policy and dealing with the application of decisions as it comes forward. The staff's responsibility is to apply the laws, the policies that you have set fairly and evenly, and bring forward recommendations that follow those. And if that happens in a collaborative way, if staff does a good professional job of following council direction, if council is respectful of the staff's effort to do that, when the thing gets to a final decision, it's smooth and it flows nicely. And importantly, members in the development community have confidence in your process. And that's an important outcome from this whole exercise. So hopefully that's something that this project has contributed towards. I'm going to hand it off to Amy now and let her talk to you about the GE workout process itself, and then going forward, the results of this whole effort. Amy?
Well, good evening, everybody. I'm pleased to be here again. This is my fourth visit to Norman. And I wanted to just say that we had, as Jerry said, we do this all over the country. I personally have been involved in probably over, 24 development review projects. And I told the staff here and your city manager as well, and I meant it, that this was about the most engaged group of people that we've had the privilege of working with. Usually in a facilitated workshop session where there are about 30 people, you'll have one or two people who never let their arms open up, I guess I would say, that they continuously have this posture of, I'm not going along with this. Literally every single person on the team from the city was willing to engage in new ideas, was willing to listen to each other. I mean, we do a lot of facilitated back and forth in small groups and large groups and sharing ideas. And, you know, if somebody has, we always ask, is there heartburn in the group? Because we want to try to have consensus. And I would say that there wasn't always consensus at the beginning, but people were willing to listen to each other, listen to the ideas, share ideas, and that by the end, the recommendations that I'll just highlight, that really there was an understanding, a much better understanding of where people were coming from, and the ability to listen to each other and accept new ideas. And so I don't think I could say that in many of the other situations, and certainly it was very enjoyable working with your staff and having them be so open to ideas and to change. Our team that led the workout were very had all been in a development review setting in some capacity before, so we had a lot of information that we could bring to the group. But every city is different and every setting is different, and so what works somewhere, what works in more may not work here, or some of your colleagues, and so we try to bring our ideas and then see how that works, and then accept your staff's ideas. And so I'm pleased to see so many people here tonight, but I do want you to know how really good they are. I don't need to read to you, but I do want to just emphasize that the process that we use for the GE workout involved a briefing book first off to let people know what we had found as the professionals looking at the process from the outside. But then really, and the leadership team identified the 2 goals I'll talk about in a minute. And then we did work, large group, small group, large group, small group. We had a great setting at your library, Pioneer Library, is that whatever, is that where we were? That was a great setting too, and very conducive to coming and the groups that we needed to do. And the ultimate goal of the process is to have these teams be able to satisfy the goals. And so actually with that, I'm going to just tell you, so the first goal was really about getting more certainty in the process, understanding cycle time, and helping reduce that cycle time. One of the key elements of any city, anywhere, is that developers want to know with certainty what the process looks like and how long it's going to take. And so that was the first goal, is really to be able to give some clarity to the time involved in a development review process for the different types. And so, as Jerry said, there were 6 maps, and the one that's in the back of the room is about the commercial process, which is probably the most complex. And so we started with that. The map in the back of the room is what came out of the GE workout process. So that's the 2B map, if you will. We did the as is, and so you could compare those maps. The first maps that we did, that when we say as is, it's really what is happening now, and then the GE workout is the 2B map. And so that's hopefully what you'll be able to get to as these improvements are made. So the second goal was really about customer service. And one of the things that we found from the customer interviews and from staff as well, because we were really trying to understand where the issues are, is the fee issue of a lot of your customers understand the beginning fees, but when they get further down in the process, they were expressing surprise. And you really don't want that. You want people to understand what the whole scheme might look like. It's tricky because not everything that you start of development is going to end up just exactly the way people think, but that was a big emphasis on the customer service piece for goal 2, especially making sure that people do have some sense of things. So you'll see as the recommendations are very much in these categories. I just want to go hit some highlights. The overall process recommendations really boiled down to being able to have somebody in charge. That was our recommendation, and you'll see we have recommendations that staff generated. We have recommendations that were management partners, and some of them overlapped. But basically, one of the things that is very exciting for staff and for us in particular is that you are implementing new software, and the new software is going to make a huge difference in being able to track how long things take. And I want to emphasize that it's not always staff holdup, okay? We know that when staff gives comments back to your applicants, that they have something they have to do. And that sometimes there's quite a long time that they have their piece of the pie. When they finally get it back into the city, then city staff have to re-engage. So the process, well, all we can say is how long it takes staff to do each element of their process. We don't know for sure how long it would take your applicant to be able to do their piece when there are comments back. But the important part is being able to demonstrate how long staff is going to take. Also, and track that, your new software, CityView, is going to help with that in a very big way. Because it will clock things in, it will clock things out, it will allow concurrent reviews that you don't have easily, you're not easily able to do that now. And there will be also an electronic submittal process, which many of your applicants the stakeholders that we talked to were very anxious for. But more importantly, now you get these big plan sets, and people literally have to be distributing them. And sometimes that takes time too. So maybe if you're not distributing, or depending on where people are, what their workload is, that's a wait time too. So that is all going to be very, very helpful as CityView comes online. And the fact that everyone that's involved in the development review process will have that software is another benefit. And so staff were excited about that. We're excited about that. That is going to help a lot. I do want to just mention that throughout the process, we had staff from all the various aspects that are involved in development review. And what became very clear is that not everybody understood the total process, which is kind of surprising, right? I mean, but if I'm an inspector and I'm looking at something during my little piece of it, I may not have understood everything that came before when something was ready for an inspection. It became very clear that this process of talking about and looking at flowcharts and the whole process was very helpful to staff. They also were very excited that you as council members may be able to have a better understanding of the whole process as well. Because when somebody complains about a piece of the process, sometimes there are things that have happened before and there are things that will be happening after that really helps understand the whole breadth of things. And including staff that are trying to advise on a piece of their process that maybe then now they know more about how it all goes and how it all flows. And so that was another benefit to having people work together, listen to each other, and understand more about what the whole process looks like from the time, not just their small piece. So that was a huge recommendation. We do have you've got the benefit of people with a lot of experience. And the staffing and succession planning recommendations that we came up with, we were concerned because you've got people with vast amounts of experience that have been here for quite a while and could retire any day if they want. And the idea of knowledge transfer is really important before they leave. This was helpful again as a process to have some of that knowledge being able to be talked about and who does what and when and how. But that is going to be important, and so you'll see some recommendations about regular training, pairing some of the tenured staff with newer employees to help make sure that knowledge transfer gets done as fast as possible and at least the whole understanding. The other thing is you've got a wealth of information right here, as you probably know, with the University of Oklahoma and your other two institutions, and so there are maybe some other opportunities as well, partnering with them and using their expertise and the staff that they're graduating, using those folks. And so there were some recommendations that we had for that. Your inspectors were very, very excited to provide recommendations about how to make their aspects more efficient. And so they came up with several, and as did we. and I know that some of those changes have already been implemented. And basically, they are much more efficient as a result of that, and they were very supportive of the idea of being able to get to work, get out into the field much more quickly than they had been, and some of the other scheduling. Again, with CityView, you will have some pretty significant help with CityView when that comes online to be able to really even streamline scheduling of inspections. Then just to talk a little bit about some plan review recommendations. The very first one, I just want to mention, you've got an applicant, and usually the applicant has their folks, whether it's engineers or architects or whatever, and so sometimes they are not aware of all the steps in the process, or where things really stand. And so our suggestion, the first one, is to copy the property owner on every single, on all the correspondence from the city, so that they are aware if they want to be aware. If they don't, fine, don't open the email, whatever, but at least they will know when the city's getting comments back, or when things are happening, and they won't just rely on one single source. And we thought that was important. We did have some fire plan recommendations, and since that time, that has been changed, and that's actually going to be more efficient now that your fire plans inspector, plans examiner, left the city, and so that was an opportunity. So those recommendations were already underway from us before we knew about that, and that has changed, and that is much more efficient at this point, as are a few other changes that have been taken care of. The other thing is that the new permit center office, as you're working through that, that's going to be a really big opportunity for people working together even better and serving your customers even better. And I just want to mention that because it is a very exciting opportunity. Customer service was a major theme throughout, as I already mentioned, focused on a lot on fees, and while you've got some good already, you've got some good materials. Your development review handbook was is good. It needs to be updated, and then it needs to be really made available online. And your website, we felt, could be upgraded to be able to make it easier for people to find things. And so we recommended some things, the FAQs, quick links, to make that a better resource for all the public, staff, customers. And interestingly, some of the staff didn't know there was a development handbook, which was interesting. So people were even in the GE workout were just like, wow, this is a great resource, because we had a copy, and they were blown away at how good it was. So even that kind of sharing of information where you would think, well, everybody would know about that. Nope, not necessarily. So it was a good experience to help folks know about the resources that are in place that may not affect them directly or may be just peripheral to what they do. I talked about the webpage. We did also feel like it'd be good to have semi-annual meetings with the development community to review any kinds of changes, and especially get feedback about and now that you are making changes, that staff is trying to streamline processes, it will be even more important to try to work with the development community and hear their feedback about the things that are working well and other things that may be changed even more. And again, now the staff-generated recommendations had a lot to do with fee estimates, online fee calculator, which some jurisdictions have. There was a lot of red flag cautions. So wait a minute, we can't tell people exactly, and everybody understands that we can't tell people exactly until there are certain known areas, but just to do sample projects with sample fees so that people really have a good idea, and it's not at the last minute where they're all of a sudden staff seems to be telling them something that they may have even said at the very beginning and didn't pay attention to. So they really came up with a lot of ways to be able to demonstrate some samples, some sample online tools as well, so that there would be that customers would really have a full picture of what might be coming down the pike. And I already mentioned the technology recommendations, scheduling software, the website improvements, the systems that will be coming into play. And we had the benefit of having one of the IT staff members with us during the workout, and she was very enthusiastic and explained what some of these improvements would do for staff. And so, including that electronic submittal, which will be very, very helpful. So that is a huge raising of the bar for you, and it will take a little while, and it will take some training, but that will be huge in the end. I think that probably one of the things that's most important when you talk about, as Jerry said, and I mentioned earlier about some certainty, is really understanding the cycle times. And so that's a huge recommendation that we think is important. Your city manager understands how important it is, and as soon as that software gets implemented, it will help with that. But then you will be able to both track the cycle times of each type of project, of if there are bottlenecks, you'll be able to see that better. Hopefully there won't be, but if there are, then you can deal with it. And then we're recommending a regular report of key measures that staff really uses, not just sending it up to the city manager's office, but actually looking at what the results are and being able to take action against that if there are issues. And I think with that, I'm going to turn it over and ask for questions. We will continue to help with implementation as desired. And then we also have a 6-month return so that we can work with staff and see, okay, of all the recommendations, what has been implemented, where are there issues, what might be a problem, let's literally go through recommendation by recommendation and see where things stand. So we will be back. I'll be lucky enough to get back and check in about 6 months.
Mayor, a couple of things that Amy mentioned. Describe the fire plan check. The fire chief, recognizing we had a pending retirement, went and found some resources and recognized that some of our neighboring agencies allow a process by which builders have that fire plan check done in advance outside of our shop, and it comes with an engineer stamp on it. It's part of their submittal. We just eliminated that entire process. We had a vacancy. Now we have literally a full-time equivalent position that we can use somewhere else potentially in the development process to prop us up where we may be a little short-staffed. Amy also described, the fees and trying to determine what everything costs, and of course, timing is everything, and we'll be bringing council chunks of our fee schedule to go through as those things are updated, and we recheck them against the market and recheck them against the cost we incur in providing the service. Amy also described opportunities with an updated website to provide better information to the development community and to the entrepreneurs who may not have that development experience, and we want to help them gain efficiencies, ask the right questions before money is spent that may not be ultimately part of the project they're able to complete. We have had conversations with our chamber friends and Scott Martin about assisting us with educating people who come to town with an entrepreneurial idea, and they may start with a chamber to say, hey, I want to be a business in Norman, what do I do? And the message is, before you lease, before you buy, before you pay franchise fees, let's ask some questions about where do you want to do your thing, and what's involved in doing your thing. We'll make sure we help you guide your idea to the place that provides you the greatest likelihood of success. She also described the facility, and of course the library, as they're moving books across the street to the new library, the remodel of our existing central library into that centralized development service facility, we think will dramatically improve the one-stop shop experience for folks coming in to seek permits and plan checks and approvals and platting, to have all of that expertise readily available from one front counter, along with having all of the inspectors on the public works side as well as the construction side in one room to share knowledge and experience. The same way the fire chief recognized that outside firms can help us check off parts of our process. We've also identified outside plan check firms in the Oklahoma area and in the Texas area that can help us in the event we have several developers bring plans in all at once, as opposed to letting it sit at a bottleneck and feed them, one at a time through the machine, to be able to farm out those plan checks to firms on standby and send them the plans electronically, have them plan check them on our behalf, and get them back so we can keep the development process moving forward. So staff has taken this very seriously. What our staff would like to do next, we did invite members of our development community to come in and watch and understand what process council had initiated. We'll be meeting with our development community to establish standards and timetables for realistic expectations. When plans are submitted, when can I expect my first set of comments? When can I expect my second set of comments? The tracking software that Amy delivered will help us keep score. And our goal is to measure our ability to meet that standard. And we will do an annual letter grade of how often we were able to meet that standard. And if we do it 90% of the time and get an A, we're going to feel pretty good about that. If we meet it 70% of the time and we get a C, we're not going to feel good about that, and we're going to take additional steps. So that's how we plan on going forward. And management partners and your staff are here to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Wilson.
Mr. City Manager, I have a question about the fire inspection process.
Yes.
Go back to that.
Yes.
It's a plan check. Okay. I'm not super familiar with how that works now. Is that like when I added a doggy daycare to an existing building, we ended up having to have a fire inspection plan. How would I go about doing that in this new future?
And I've asked the fire chief to join us in case I get this wrong.
Does that make
In the
sense, my
event of
question?
a remodel or a change in occupancy on an existing facility, if it's required that in your tenant improvement plans, that there's an engineer stamp on either fire suppression, sprinkler system, whatever needs to be done, that you used to bring in your set of plans showing those drawings, and our internal fire plans examiner would review it and make comments. That was supposedly happening simultaneously with your plan check on your tenant improvements. The opportunity now exists to have your architect, engineer, whoever's drawing your plans, send that out to a couple of different firms, have them plan check that, stamp it before it's submitted to us, that this fire sprinkler plan does meet all the fire code, and then all we'll do on construction is inspect it to make sure it was built to plan. So it'll probably save you some time. Same type of inspection takes place, it just takes place in the private sector before it comes into our shop.
So then what's the cost look like? Is it more or less same? Does the cost go to the city? Does the cost go to the developer? Who's paying for that, and do they pay for it now?
Yeah, that would be a fee that we would no longer charge for that element. And as we described, if you deliver a big set of plans, you're going to build an apartment complex, and we've got 10 houses in a strip mall in front of you in line, the ability for us to send that apartment complex set of plans out to a shop that all they do is plan check, the fee that you would pay us, we would pay them. So it wouldn't cost you any more, and hopefully we could speed that process up. We have had conversations with some of these firms, and we've had developers say, time is money. And in these private firms, the ability to have a developer negotiate directly with that plan check firm to say, look, I really need my first set of comments in 2 weeks, and I'll pay for overtime if you guys will crank them out over the weekend. And those opportunities do exist with those third-party plan check firms.
Okay, I have an additional question. As an entrepreneur, I have a tendency to draw my plans on the back of something. So are those opportunities still there? Like, can just the average Joe lean come in and have a sketch on here's what I want to do in this empty building, and what point, and I may be digging way too into the weeds for tonight, but at what point do we trigger like having to have an architect involved?
And Jane may be able to add some value in this one too. Typically, we do a lot of things on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper with a magic marker to do a patio cover, etc. There are some building code requirements where calculations come into play that require a little more in-depth work. We'll remember Terry on our staff who recently headed down south.
Abandoned us.
Yes, his primary function was to be that liaison, that ombudsman between our entrepreneurial community and our development community. And a lot of his time did get consumed in Norman Forward, and we are in his recruitment to fill that position, the focus back on the ombudsman between our entrepreneurs and our development community. So we want to make sure that we do not lose that service opportunity.
So an
for those
entrepreneur
funds.
like myself would kind of know early on when they need to get an architect involved and when they can just plan an empty building for a bunch of dogs to run around in on the back of a napkin. In theory.
Yes, you would know. You would bring the plans in, and you can sit down with the plan reviewer, and they can outline what your requirements would be. I don't know exactly what that break is, when you would have to have an engineer involved or not, but, I mean, that's what those pre-meetings are for, is to give you the opportunity to find out what you have to bring back in.
And then a follow-up question, follow-up to the follow-up to the follow-up is, how do we let people know what this process is?
Which process?
Any of the processes, all of the processes. So I have a tendency to run around town asking people if I can rent their building first. And then I come figure out what I need to do second and apologize and get mad and
right.
yell and fire and things like that. So how can we educate those people earlier on in the process?
Well, I would suggest the pre-development meeting. I mean, that's your first step. When you come in for a pre-development meeting, we try to have everybody that is, that might be touching your application. So we have zoning, building, public works, and fire. We try to have everybody involved. If they can't attend the meeting, we always pass on the information of who they need to contact to get the guidelines of what they'd have to bring back in. But the pre-development meetings, and that's different than the pre-development meetings that you bring in for a zoning application. We talk about pre-development meetings,
I
but
think I've been
it's
through
a
one in the special.
pre-construction meeting, if you want to call it that. And so you would sit down with the staff, and we would go over what your requirements would be.
You know, Your Honor, our Chief Information Officer, Annalise in the back row, will be helping us with the educational campaign when we update that development handbook that Amy had described. It's close. It's not current in all aspects. That is being updated, and that's a document we want to make sure is in several entities' hands. Our development community will be welcome to hard copies at the chamber, as well as a highlighted section in our newly revitalized website to say, here's a digital copy of our handbook, and kind of soup to nuts for beginners on going through the process.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Okay. I think it's great to expedite the process and optimize our staff's time. Most of my questions just pertain to cost. Because I remember the gentleman said earlier that if we want to fund this, and fund these improvements. And so I understand we probably don't have a big idea of what each thing is going to cost. I think that some of these things will be more easily implemented than others, such as I think the website and the software will be extremely useful. And I think we can make quite a bit of use out of the software. But I do wonder about maintenance of the software that you spoke about, the City View. Is that going to be done by our IT, or is that going to be done externally? And so what are the costs associated with that, as well as is it a one-stop shop for example, the scheduling, for the fire inspections, for scheduling in general, for the meetings with staff? Do the members of the community have, or our development community, do they have their own logins to the software, or is it something that is it a link on the website? I just have some questions about how that's going to operate.
I think I'd have to defer to your staff person that's actually going to be doing that work to respond to the detailed questions like that. But I do want to make a general comment, and that is that the development review process and development in the city of Norman is a very big, costly process. You spend millions of dollars a year for all the staff to do development review. By and large, the developers pay the cost of that work. You set up your fee structure so that it's full cost recovery. That's generally the
So that's
goal.
what I understand, and I'm
Yes.
wondering with the cost of these implementations,
So
if
if
we're
there
gonna
is an
need to
additional
review our
cost,
fees.
if there is an additional cost to do the website and to do some of these other things, good efficient management says trade it off and don't spend money that you shouldn't. But still, it's a very big costly process. So you want to do the detailed question?
Yes, fortunately, as far as the software goes, we've already invested in with the ERP implementation a couple of years back. So the $6 million thereabouts that we've invested, that takes care of our finances, that takes care of our utility billing systems, but it also takes care of this city view that they're mentioning. Carrie Madden's the project manager there. That's who they were also mentioning that was in from our team over there. And a lot of the automated ideas come from the fact that we've looked at city view, we've selected it, and we've already invested in that. The same goes for the website implementation. That's already been paid for, or it's in the process. And go live for the websites tentatively April of next year. And then we kick off the planning and community development software, City View, at the beginning of January. We want to get the foundation set first, which is financial systems. That kicks off, actually, we'll go live with our financial systems November 4th. And then when that's finished, we'll start focusing on City View at the beginning of January, and we expect it to take about 14 months for implementation.
Thank you, Jim. One more follow-up to that. Is City View an internal software program, or is it available to the community as well?
It's something that the city purchased. As far as the community being able to view it, they'll view the product of it. And there'll be, when we do plan reviews and things like that,
Customer-facing.
Jane's staff and other staff members will be able to show them bits of it as they go through relevant pieces of the process.
Okay, I'm just wondering if this is the place where they can access the checklist, the fee estimator, and the
Yes.
handbook, once the handbook has been updated, since it's apparently inaccessible on the website as is. If this is, it's kind of exciting, I guess, to other people to have it all kind of in one place and be made accessible and easier. So that's what my question was about
Yes,
the software.
well, basically the software is a business system that will handle the process. Basically everything that we've drawn back here and drawn out, it will automate those functions. As we go through plan reviews and things like that, there'll be pieces of it that the customers can see and the public can see. And then we'll update the website with relevant information. We have content people that will be putting relevant information like the plan review on the website so that you can view it.
Okay, so then going forward for me, I'm just really interested in the cost of implementation. I think that since we're already investing in City View, it's something that's pretty easy to do. The one that I think that would cost the most is going to be the succession planning, getting the engineers, internships, recruitments, and things like that. So that's the one I think I'm most worried about. So I'd be interested in seeing those going forward, the cost of all of that.
Starting next month.
Lovely, thank you.
Bierman.
So I think when I went into this, I had maybe a slightly different view of what this review was going to be, but I do see a lot of overlap. I really was personally focused a little bit more on the process of a business going into an existing building rather than necessarily the process of constructing a building itself. But like I said, there's a lot of overlap, and I do see the value in being comprehensive with all of it. But one of the things, and I'm hoping that in the performance management recommendations is maybe where some of this falls, I received quite a bit of feedback from the public that kind of spurred my interest in this. And their concerns were mostly about different inspectors applying different standards or saying, well, it's not written here, but this is what we do, or having, two businesses in different parts of the same building being asked for different things for their certificates of occupancy. So maybe it's an issue of conveyance of information. Maybe it is an issue of applying standards in different ways. But I didn't quite see anything in the performance management recommendations that alluded to tracking kind of the standardization of the application of the rules. So I just wanted to see if I could get a little more insight on that.
There wasn't anything explicit in performance measurement piece, except that if you do, let's say if you do a customer survey or you do feedback on a regular basis, you would be able to start to identify that. But I would say that the more information that is put out, like there are recommendations about checklists. So when people see a checklist, and even for an inspection, let's say that everybody is following the same, literally, you have something in front of you and we can check it off together, it will help with consistency. I also think that you have had some staff changes that will definitely help with some of that. And so it's, I think that that is an important element, and that the staff, at least that we worked with during the GE workout, recognized how important consistency is from one person to the other. And I think it's very top of mind. And that some of these other techniques will help with that. And I think that the best way to get to your issue is probably a regular customer survey where people actually, talk about those kinds of issues if they had them and are willing to share that information. But
Great.
I think that'll come that way.
I appreciate that.
The opportunity to, one, communicate with our staff that this is a council priority, our priorities are your priorities. So everybody in the process that went through this exercise recognizes that this was important to council. In this process, we heard stories about 2 identical buildings being built in different parts of town, and one inspector required an inspection on this concrete block structure every 3rd row of block. I need to come look. The other inspector on the other side of town said, call me when the roof's on. So that one got done in 45 days, and this one got done in 9 months. And that's an internal issue that we are addressing. We are in the process of recruiting a new chief building official who will recognize that in the evaluation process of our inspection staff, those standards, if we've got one inspector that's making 20 inspections a day and one inspector that's making 4 inspections a day, why are we off? What are you looking at? Why does it take, that long to do 4 if others are getting, 20 in the same day? So we do want to make sure we are standardized in our application of what we're plan checking. Software helps us out there, but we will be graded on that efficiency.
Great, and I think it was you who actually coined the phrase that I really appreciated, which was the one bite at the apple theory. And that's something that I'm hoping we'll figure out a way to track, maybe in a different way than customer service surveys, to know how many times we're not necessarily getting it right the first time. And so, that's something that I think would be valuable to staff and council and the public. So, and that's not necessarily something that you can catch in kind of customer surveys. I mean, maybe I've done a few in my day, but probably not as many as you guys. So, but that's something that I think can really be helpful in terms of building public trust with City Hall and encouraging economic development in what I think is the best way, which is from the ground up with small businesses.
One of the metrics that you can track are frequencies of callbacks, having to do it over and over again. And so that's a data point that will be checked. I do want to underscore a couple of things. One is, it really is a management commitment to assure consistency. That's a continuing thing. All the staff folks that do this work are knowledge workers, and so each of them has their own way of doing business. That's the way it is. It's management's responsibility to make sure that the entity is consistent. And that's why checking back with customers on a regular basis is essential. That has to be done corporately. You can't depend on the departments that provide the service to do that, because the developer will pull his or her punches. I don't want to upset the apple cart here by saying something critical, but if it's anonymous, if it's done in a professional way, and if it's done in the front office and the city manager's office, then you're going to get candor. And you need to do that regularly, and you need to be serious about it. Just say one other thing, and that is about implementation of all this. As Amy pointed out in her presentation, there are a total of 45 separate recommendations, 29 that we did from all of our front-end work, and another 16 that came out of the GE workout process itself. That's a lot of it. If you think about it, that's all additional work to the day-to-day work that staff has to do to keep things flowing. And so it's all got to be planned, it's all got to be sequenced and prioritized, and then implemented. We have, as a part of our engagement, a plan to circle back in 6 months and do a catch-up. How are we doing? What has been accomplished? What remains to be done? What problems have you encountered? We're now doing that routinely on an engagement of this sort, just because of the complexity that's involved with it. It is our way of keeping management's feet to the fire, frankly, because if it's being implemented, that it has to be given a priority. And it has to be planned and prioritized, and that's all doable. This is not rocket science, but when you set priorities, you set something aside so you can do something that's more important. That's a management function, so go get them.
Councilmember Scanlon?
Just one simple question. I know that the dialogue has been intense to get us as far as we've gotten, dialogue between you all and our staff, and the onus is really on us now to work on these recommendations. But I'm looking at that slide, and it says assist Norman leaders with implementation of recommendations. So what are you all doing for the next 6 months, basically?
What are we doing?
That's what the slide says. You're going to assist us. I'm wondering how.
We are available to respond to questions and provide counsel and assistance as it would be helpful. So the staff knows how to get a hold of us. We encourage that. And so, we don't have to bring a team on site and do big on-site work to do that. We just have to remain available and respond to questions, and we'll do that. One of the things that we do bring to the table is a lot of years' experience doing this, as Amy said, with other cities. So we know what best practices are. That's what underlies our 29 recommendations that we made. At some point, what will happen with some of those recommendations is that people say, well, I don't know if we really want to do that or not. Well, we made the recommendations for what we thought were good reasons. If there are other reasons in the course of doing that that countervene that, then by all means, we encourage people to consult us and let us know, and then we'll do the back check.
And there will be some unknowns as we go along, and we'll seek clarification with you and that kind of thing.
And that, I want to say that is welcome from our perspective. You betcha.
But I do want to mention that we didn't give a lot of emphasis on this, but one of our deliverables to the city was an implementation action plan. So for each of the recommendations that we made, there are steps. So we've already tried to start that process so that, it's really do this, do this, do this, and we gave it a suggested priority. So it's not just like we gave the recommendations and then walked away. And as Jerry said, we're available to talk anytime. But it is really a roadmap. So the city has a roadmap that was our best guess about how each of these particular recommendations could be implemented. So I just didn't want to ignore that because we didn't really emphasize it so much.
Thank you.
Any other questions from council members? I would just like to share my appreciation with our city manager for diving in on this big project. I'm very impressed with work that's already been done. Thank you for your guidance on this, and I look forward to see what we can accomplish in the next 6 months. I know that this timing is fantastic with the development center that we will have, again, with the old library. I think timing is everything, and Daryl, I really appreciate you just diving in on this one. We know that this has been an issue that's been needed to be addressed for quite some time in Norman, and I appreciate that this council and the city manager has not shied away from that challenge, and I think it speaks a lot for our goals for the future as a community. So, thank you. All right, seeing no other questions, thank you, management partners. We're going to move on to item number 2. This is discussion regarding the amended and restated Master Operating and Development Agreement for the University North Park Tax Increment Finance District pursuant to the amended and restated Norman University North Park Project Plan dated as of June 30th, 2019. Are we turning it over to you, Catherine?
Yes, thank you. All right, thank you, Bryce. Bryce is going to move my slides for me, so I really appreciate that. Okay, so just a brief background. This is, of course, dealing with the University North Park TIF, which was adopted by ordinance back in 2006, along with a project plan that set forth authorized project costs up to $54.725 million. The TIF is really just a funding mechanism to fund those project costs, and it set aside a portion of sales tax revenue within the district and a portion of ad valorem tax revenue within the district to fund those costs. The project plan components are listed there on your screen: traffic and roadway improvements, conference center and cultural facilities, legacy park, lifestyle center, and economic development. And it's been implemented over time with a series of contracts. We have 6 development agreements, a master operating agreement, a financing agreement, and an economic development agreement. and now a master amended and restated agreement. This came about through several council actions. Last fall, we began looking at ways to address ongoing general fund shortages, especially in the out years. And you all looked at a number of options. We could allow it to expire naturally. It was generating enough revenue that increments totaling $54.725 million would have been collected in another year or so. We looked at changing the increment allocation. We looked at repealing the TIF ordinance without cooperation from the developer. And although we can do that, we've got all those contracts we have to address. And then we talked about working cooperatively with the developers to end the increment effective June 30, which is the direction that you all moved in. So with this option, council wanted to address the outstanding project cost and agreements and avoid possible exposure to liability on the contracts. We wanted to achieve a goal of ending the increment, especially the sales tax increment, by June 30th. At that time, we thought there'd be about $15 to $17 million available in increment collected through June 30th, depending on whether or not we got the benefit of the 2019 ad valorem tax revenue. And then there were about $25 million remaining in authorized project costs. So we've been working on agreements and plans to address that delta between the $17 million and the $25 million ever since. Council has taken a series of actions in 2019. I apologize, that print's a little small. In January, we adopted a resolution requesting the statutory TIF committee to review a proposal from council to use the cultural facility TIF funds for a recreational complex, which consisted of 3 Norman Forward projects. In March, we had a resolution and a contract expressing council's desire to enter into binding agreements to terminate the TIF early and directing staff to negotiate settlement of all outstanding matters. And then the contract was the MOU that outlined the framework within which the parties would work together to do that. In May, you ratified the selection of an auditor, and there's some mention of that in the agreement, and appropriated funds for a special audit of the UNP TIF funds. In June, we adopted the FYE 20 budget based on the assumption that this sales tax increment would end effective June 30th, 2019. And on June 25th, you all adopted a resolution that directed staff to prepare project plan amendments and final development agreements consistent with a term sheet that was attached to that resolution. So I want to go over the contract terms, and I have slides for each component of the term sheet, and I've pointed to where that is in the development agreement. So the first issue, of course, is the tax increment. The MOU, the resolution in June, and the term sheet all recognized a target end date by June 30th of the sales tax increment, and a target.
Prefer to go all the way through or take questions?
It doesn't matter to me.
Okay. Councilmember Scanlon? Never mind. Councilmember Patron?
This is just administratively, we don't have every even page, so we're trying to keep up and having.
I'm just watching that. I was looking at the screen.
I think the clerk's office went to go redo those copies.
Thank you.
I apologize.
We do have it right in front of us on the screen.
No, but I can't write on the screen.
I'm just saying, do you want to continue or do you want to wait until they come back?
Go ahead.
Other thoughts, council members? Are you good with continuing, or would you like to wait until the copies come back? I'm fine. All right, Catherine?
Okay. And the ad valorem tax increment, it's been recognized all along that the target end date for that would be after collection of the 2019 tax assessment. Property tax has about an 18-month lag between assessment and collection. So this is just addressing everything that was constructed in the district through the end of 2018 and assessed in 2019. In the development agreement, you'll see the section dealing with this in section 2. It says sales tax apportionment will end effective June 30th, and the ad valorem tax apportionment will end on the earlier date of either the collection of all of the 2019 assessments or April 30th, 2020. And we do typically receive all of the assessments by that April date. I'll go through each of the components from the project plan, and then at the end I'll cover some of the other provisions in the agreement. Traffic and roadway improvements, in the term sheet, it set forth $5.02 million for the remaining traffic and roadway improvements. Everything internal to the district has been completed, but there are a number of improvements that are important to the city outside of the increment district, but within the project area. And those include projects at Robinson, at West I-35 and Crossroads, Tecumseh and Flood, and at 24th, Tecumseh and Interstate Drive East, and Tecumseh and Interstate Drive West. And under that term sheet adopted by council, the developer was released from the obligation to fund these improvements. And what that's referring to is an obligation in development agreement number 1. Based on the preliminary budget of those projects, we thought $11.55 million would be sufficient to cover the cost, but if we went over, the developer was going to cover any overage. We've gone over on every project significantly. We've spent almost twice as much on the projects. The estimates were off in some cases. In some cases, the projects evolved over time. And a good example of that is the Tecumseh and Flood and 24th project, which is now, I think, a $9 million project. And in the original project plan, we thought it'd be around $950,000. So these projects have changed over time because of development in the area. That is addressed in section 10A in the development agreement. You can see that the amount's the same. It's for those same projects, and it also includes a release from the obligation to fund any improvements over the $11.55 million authorization. Other provisions in the agreement, it says that section 3.2 of development agreement number 5 survives. That provision said that the property can be developed as planned in accordance with the 2009 TIA, but if the PUD plan is amended and more traffic results from that amendment and they exceed the service level D set forth in the original project plan and subsequent agreements, the developer would have to construct any required traffic infrastructure. It recognizes that we don't need a TIA, traffic and impact analysis, for the recreation facilities. And then it also says that in that section, that section 4.10.3 of Development Agreement 5 survives. That is the provision that called for an entrance at Tecumseh and Robinson. The Robinson entrance has already been built, and the Tecumseh Road entrance obligation continues under this agreement. And it would be constructed in the same way the Robinson entrance was. So an equal cost share between the business improvement districts, so the property owners in the area, and UNP. Through this process, the cultural facility component has become the recreation facility component. And this is for the multi-sport and the indoor aquatics facility. Originally, it also included a potential senior center, but feedback from the seniors indicated they did not want to be located with these facilities, and you all selected Reeves Park for that facility. The term sheet set aside $5.15 million for these facilities. That includes acquisition of the property, so 10 acres for $2.06 million. 2 acres will be donated. The site will be mutually determined based on the design of the structure. And then there's a $350,000 aquatic contribution offset along with a $2.7 million construction supplement. The city will use the Norman forward budget for these projects, which is $22.5 million, and I think we're finding out pretty quickly that that is not sufficient. And the facilities will open by October 1st, 2022. You'll see this covered in the development agreement in section 12. It contains all of those provisions, but it says we will make every effort to open by October 1st, 2022. And looking at our timeline and the implementation plan you all adopted, I think it was last week on October 8th, we do believe we'll have construction completed by July, so that 2022, so that gives some additional time for the unforeseeable. Other provisions related to recreation facilities will determine the site location by March 31st, 2020. We know it's going to go on the land bordering the airport on the east and 24th Avenue on the west, just north of Embassy Suites. But we didn't lock ourselves into any particular location on that land because we don't have these facilities designed yet, and we knew the design could inform the optimal location for us. And so the developer agreed to work with us to determine that location by March 31st, and we will close on that acquisition by June 30th, 2020, or upon issuance of the construction bonds. We'll begin construction by January 1st, 2021. There's a buyback clause if we don't start construction. And then the next component is Legacy Park. In the term sheet, we set aside $250,000 for Legacy Park, including $175,000 for a surface lot. It shouldn't say in the parking lot, it's in the park. And then $75,000 for a remaining business improvement district contribution, and those are the same terms contained in the development agreement. Other provisions, this is just dealing with cleanup items from previous development agreements. UTC has complied with their obligation to donate the land for the Legacy Park. That was done several years ago prior to park construction. There are no further obligations related to Legacy Park under prior agreements, and the city will continue to maintain Legacy Park and Legacy Trail in first-class condition. Town Center, and again, this is a lot of print, and I apologize. In the term sheet, we set aside $5 million for town center retail and entertainment uses. It's the same thing you'll find in the development agreement. It's a city manager decision only if all criteria are met. Otherwise, council would have to approve any request. It has to be in an area designated as the lifestyle center. It's actually town center in the exhibit to the agreement. Must support a user not already in Norman. Retail standards have been raised previously. In the original project plan, they were quite a bit lower. We raised them in development agreement number 5, and those numbers carry over to this. So $300 per square foot for stores larger than 10,000 square feet, $400 per square foot for stores smaller than 10,000 square feet. And unlike the previous agreement, this has to be demonstrated based on past performance in communities with similar demographics. Thank you. The entertainment use is allowed here. There's not a sales per square foot requirement because those can vary so much depending on the type of entertainment use, but it must present an entertainment option unique to Norman, and it must include urban design, walkability, and connectivity. The user must either purchase land or sign a lease of at least 3 years. The city, as it can with any retailer, could consider other non-TIF incentives, sales tax rebates, permit and fee waivers, expedited permit processing. These are all things contained in our economic development policy adopted by council a number of years ago. But the deadline to request TIF funds is June 30th, 2026. And in both the term sheet and the development agreement, you'll see a waiver of associated deadlines and penalties with the town center development. Other just sort of process provisions, if the funds are requested and the city manager is able to verify that all of the qualifiers are met, they'll be distributed within 30 days. The development can be done in phases, but each phase in which they're requesting any funds would have to meet all of those qualifiers. The town center funds will be held in escrow by the bank, and all of our TIF funds are held by a separate bank currently, and they'll continue to be held there. And then up to $150,000 in town center costs can be spent on the town center entrance if it's constructed in association with a qualifying user. The next component is economic development. In the term sheet, we set aside $1.425 million for economic development, same thing in the development agreement. This includes the maximum incentive that could be earned under development agreement number 6 with Emmy. UMP will accelerate its option to purchase the UMP Corporate Center 1, subject to Emmy's first right of refusal on a couple of lots out there. That carries over into the development agreement. There are a number of provisions in this development agreement dealing with the economic development piece, and primarily it's dealing with the transaction that will occur between UNP and NEDC. So NEDC will remain the designee to implement the economic development objectives of the project plan. UMP doesn't have to sell any additional land to NEDC. but they will repurchase Corporate Center Edition Section 1 by separate agreement with NEDC. And the purchase price will at least equal the outstanding loan on all 60 acres. They're just purchasing 30. And until that closing, economic development TIF funds can be used as interest payments on the NEDC loan. And a little background here, Council has previously adopted 2 separate resolutions providing those economic development funds to make those interest payments over the years. And that account just recently was completely utilized. And so until they close, if an interest payment comes up, that same process would continue so that the economic development funds could make that interest payment. NEDC will continue to develop Corporate Center Edition 2 for economic development purposes, so that is still there. The development requirements that they had as part of their transaction with UMP will be extended from December 31st, 2023, 2 years to December 31st, 2025. There's also a section in there that talks about the remaining city and TIF authority obligations, and then the remaining UNP and UTC obligations. The surviving city and authority obligations include appointing members to the Oversight Committee, reviewing development submissions, considering development agreements where needed, and moving forward with the projects that the city's obligated to do. So the traffic and roadway improvements, we're going to move forward with design and construction, requesting financing for the ACOG portion of those improvements, and recreation facilities, which of course have a significant Norman Forward portion for the funding. UNP and UTC will comply with all of our development requirements. They will also consider development agreements if needed, and then they will prepare and submit designs for public facilities if they end up being included in town center costs, and they'll cooperate in all of those contracts. Other miscellaneous provisions kind of sprinkled throughout the agreement. Parties will continue to operate in good faith to perform their obligations under the agreement. The Development Oversight Committee remains in place as set forth in the amended project plan. Property will be developed in accordance with the PUD, any other City of Norman regulations, and the ARB design guidelines, the Architectural Review Board. The developers released from cooperatively master planning the undeveloped areas with the city. Covenants remain in place. If they're amended, the city as a property owner will cooperate with the amendment process. The ARB will continue, but the city won't be required to approve changes to those design guidelines. And then there's a section on the special audit, which I mentioned before. This is the audit that was authorized by council back in May. And I mentioned this in the memo as well. This called out several issues in the samples that they pulled, and the end result was a credit to the TIF funds. So funds in the amount of $256,048 will be transferred to the TIF authority. And I think I put in the memo, but the reason why this is important is because these TIF funds are a combination of ad valorem taxes and sales taxes. And under the Local Development Act, if any funds remain at the end of the project plan, when all of the projects have been completed, they go back to those entities in the same proportion in which they were contributed. So clearing that up is what is recommended to ensure at the end that the tax dollars go back to the original taxing entities. It also talks about the payment process when costs are requested and TIF funds are needed for the costs outlined in the project plan. And then, of course, we'll continue to do regular audits. This is included as part of our CAFR every year, and that will continue to be done. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I have one, and this might be for Anthony. With the delay in concluding this, when we backdate it, have we lost money in the process?
Good evening, Madam Mayor. I'm Anthony Francisco, the Finance Director. During the interim period since June 30th, we have continued to make apportionments of sales tax to the TIFA trustee. If the project plan amendments in the development agreement are approved, then we would reimburse to the city the sales tax apportionments that have been made since the accrued June 30th apportionments. So the September and October apportionments would be reimbursed.
So we don't lose anything
We don't
in that
lose anything.
reimbursement process?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Scott.
Can we go back to the Robinson project slide, the Robinson and Crossroads? Traffic and roadway. I just want to confirm, I understand that, you know, ACOG is redoing their, structure, so for their bidding. So I want to ensure that this project is safe, I guess, both with ACOG and within these new terms, as far as being able to get started as soon as the funding, the federal funding comes through. I think maybe that's, I don't know, is that you or is that you?
Well, I will say, yes, the ACOG formula has been revised, and no small thanks to the mayor and her work at ACOG. And I think those applications are due in December, so that'll be part of the ongoing process. And yes, as soon as we have the ACOG funding, we'll be ready to start that project and finalize the design and get it going, because the funds allocated towards that here are already in the bank.
They're
We don't
already
have
in
to
the
do
bank.
financing for that as
And
long as we
after
get the ACOG funds.
After we, in the tax increment, this funding is still there, it's already allocated,
Correct.
confirmed
Correct.
by our finance director and public works director and city attorney.
Yes,
Okay,
unanimous.
thank you. I'll have more questions, I'm sure, later, but that's the big one.
Councilmember Wilson.
So concerning the Robinson Crossroads intersection, I'm seeing that there is money in the TIF, and we have money set aside in our capital projects budget for this year. That's just in case? Okay. That's all. I just got confirmed. We're good. Sorry.
Any other additional, Councilmember Bierman.
Okay. I feel like I've talked about this so much in the last 2 years, but I still feel like I have all the same questions. So, but I actually had kind of scribbled out kind of a similar question to what Councilmember Wilson was asking. If we already have the funds in our capital improvement fund that we need, why do we need them through the TIF?
I would defer to Anthony. I don't think we have sufficient funding in the capital
Okay,
improvement.
and that's why I wanted to ask the question.
I think that's what I was trying to ask.
During the council deliberations for the adoption of the fiscal year 2019-2020 budget, there was a concern amongst council members about the safety, for lack of a better term, of those funds, the federal matching funds for the Crossroads I-35 Robinson project, and that being a very high priority of council. So the concern was that if we were not successful in obtaining the federal funds, council wanted to set aside some fund balance in the capital fund to make up the federal portion of that project. We did not appropriate those funds, but we did make a set aside of fund balance. So with the recent decisions at the ACOG level, we are fairly confident that the federal funds will be made available and we will not have to appropriate funds out of the capital fund for that project.
Okay, so stay there, because I have a follow-up to that. If we get the ACOG funds and we're not going to need the funds from the city in the capital fund, does that mean we don't need the money that we've set aside in the TIF fund for it?
No, ma'am. The funds that were, and they have been appropriated. The funds in the TIF fund are for the local share of the project. The capital funds were if we were not to obtain the federal funds.
Okay, excellent. That answers that one for me. Thank you. That's okay. I was just gonna say, I have a lot of questions, but a couple of the ones that I want to focus on center around the entertainment incentive. And so can you, or someone, I don't know who, whether it's Catherine, Daryl, who qualifies to access that entertainment incentive? I mean, what if I have the best idea in the world that costs $5,001,001, and I have the $1, and it's unique to Norman and never been around this area before, but I need $5 million to do it. Can I come and claim the money?
If you own property in the Lifestyle Center, or you have a contract for property in the Lifestyle Center, then yes, you could request those funds. But it's likely going to be the property owner
Okay.
in that Lifestyle Center area.
So we can safely assume that this $5 million will be available to more or less, maybe with a few exceptions, a select group of people who either already own property or are planning to purchase property from someone else.
It'll either be UTC or a retailer they have a lease with, or a retailer that's agreed to purchase the property.
Okay. So that, okay. So that kind of leads me to my next question is what value, so right now, the city manager, if it meets all of the requirements, can just sign off on it without council approval, or not requiring council approval, I should say. And so what value does the city get from not requiring council to sign off on the use of the funds?
It's not necessarily a value to the city, it's a value to the developer, and that was
Okay.
one of their negotiated terms for agreeing to reducing that incentive amount from $8.25 million down to $5 million.
Okay. And what definition are we using for new to Norman or unique to Norman? If we're talking movie theater, are we talking about the number of screens? Are we talking about the selling of alcohol? What distinguishes one movie theater from another? What distinguishes new to Norman or unique to Norman? And how does a future city manager or council decide whether or not that whatever project comes up meets that definition?
The way it's worded is an entertainment option not already existing in Norman. I think this is maybe the first presentation I haven't said. For example, we do not want to incentivize our third bowling alley. So to me, it's something that doesn't already exist.
So that would be no movie
We now
theater.
have that AMC movie theater. That's more of a, I don't know if specialty theater is the right term, but it's not your regular theater. So another theater might be difficult. It would have to be something really different and unique. So I don't know that it would necessarily be a theater. It might be some other entertainment option. And the reason we sort of pivoted our focus to entertainment is because you see that in successful developments now because of the ability to shop online, that to get shoppers out into the community and to create these community centers, it's not just retail anymore. It's got to have some entertainment component. And I've got literature from the ICSC that Sarah Kaplan provided me that talks about that, and you see it, around in new developments where a lot of times they're anchored not by large department stores anymore, but by some sort of entertainment use.
And okay, so I definitely understand that. My big concern is just kind of the translation of information from one city staff to another, from one council to another. Are we going to have any of these guidelines actually defined in these documents? Because while I understand what you're saying, how do we know that if it's not you sitting in this chair in 2026, whoever it is, how do we know that they are going to apply that same standard and use that same line of thinking then as we have now?
I mean, we tried to develop some guidelines that were flexible enough to anticipate future projects that we haven't thought of yet, and that's the thing. You want your guidelines to be specific, but you don't want them to be so tight that something great comes along and they don't meet the guidelines, even though everybody wants it. And so that's why they're written that way. I think, it's still got to be an option not already located in Norman. I think any city manager would probably talk to council members about any request, even though it doesn't require council approval. I think a city manager would want to keep you all in the loop. That'd be a wise move. So the way it's written, it was the balance we tried to strike between specificity yet flexibility for future development.
So I personally am not comfortable with not having council approve an amount of that nature. So I don't know what that means for the future, but that's kind of how I'm feeling about that. Although I appreciate that. I feel like this is kind of the curse of council. We have a similar issue with the definition of cultural facility. And so, we're now dealing with a little bit of a cultural facility slush fund where we've got all of this money and we've tried to figure out what to do with it. And now we're just going to change the name of it and hope that no one's noticed that we've moved the marble under another shell. So I have one, I guess I'm trying not to ask all my questions all at once and give everyone else some time, but I would like to know what defines a minor and inconsequential change to a project plan versus a major change. What's the threshold for that?
Under the Local Development Act, it's typically a change in 5%.
Of the total, so it would be of the 54
Yeah.
million. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. I'm gonna let someone else go now.
Well, you're the only one in the queue, so help yourself.
Okay.
Oh, just kidding. She wants back in. Councilmember Scott.
Thank you. I'll be quick. I do want to just say thank you so much to the members of council who have expressed that Robinson and Crossroads is equally as important to them as it is to me and to Councilmember Patron, because it butts up on our wards. And I just want to say thank you for ensuring that that project is safe, and hopefully we can free up some of those capital improvement budget funds when the funding from the federal government comes through. I want to address the entertainment. Councilmember Bierman brought up a good point, and if I'm concerned if it's too ambiguous that somebody might bring back the the ever loathed arena deal. And so that's my fear, and I'm wanting, because we got a new AMC over in the Robinson Crossroads, and it's awesome. And so if that's preventing something, a cool theater from going up, like a Studio Movie Grill in the University North Park area, what kind of, can we narrow down, can we change that language at this time, or not at this very moment, but like going forward to kind of make it less ambiguous and narrow it down?
I think the ultimate, for the Studio Movie Grill example, if the city manager says this doesn't meet all these criteria, they still have the option to come to council with a development agreement. So that gives the opportunity for something that maybe we haven't thought of that runs afoul of these guidelines, that comes in that you all want and would like to incentivize. That gives the option for them to come to council and request that.
Okay, for like the Studio Movie Grill idea.
Right, for something like that,
Okay.
sure. I think, these terms are the same as what was in the term sheet that was adopted back in June, so I think it's difficult to try and change that now. It's also part of what was in the amended project plan that's already been adopted by the statutory TIF, or recommended for adoption by the statutory TIF committee.
I understand that. Just, hindsight is 20/20. And I just want to, I don't think any of us here on this council, on this dais, asked for this deal, and we're just trying to work with what we've got and do our best to get our money back and to move forward. So I just want to make sure that now we are doing our due diligence, and if there is any room for negotiating some of that language, since we're still in this process and we haven't finalized anything, just to ensure that we, I think that some of us will just sleep a little better at night if there's any way to make sure that nobody tries to come at us with an arena proposal when we, especially without the construction on Robinson and Crossroads there, it's just not sustainable in that area.
The arena proposal, I believe, would be a change in the PUD.
It would.
So
it would have to come to
that's a whole
council
different monster,
anyway.
So I think it would be coming to council anyway as a change in the design and the master plan. The PUD, I'm sorry,
Okay.
the planned unit development.
Okay.
Councilmember Patron.
Okay, I have a bunch of questions too, so I'll try to just do a few and then let somebody else and come back, but yeah, bounce around a little bit. Okay, so the first thing is, what is a town center? And we know what a lifestyle center is. What is a town center?
To me, it's probably a little bit similar to the town center. Somewhere around, I think it was 2012 when we first adopted development agreement number 5. Everyone was struggling with this after the recession. Lifestyle centers aren't being built. We can't legislate our demographics and get particular stores that we want necessarily if we don't have the demographics to support it. And so that's why you see the focus more in what it looks like. In addition to the retail sales per square foot, the previous project plan just required either they met lower sales per square foot, they had to meet 2 of 3, lower sales per square foot, located not in Norman or located not in a 25-mile radius of Norman, up to Penn Square Mall, basically. And so that really wasn't sufficient, we didn't feel like, to get us what we wanted. And so you see where we have added, and this came from prior development agreements, urban design, walkability and connectivity, those kind of things, because that was our attempt at trying to say, this is what we want it to look like. We want it to connect to the park across 24th, the hotels to the north, and be something that's walkable. And that's really what a lifestyle center was when they were being built, just not dictating the kind of stores that they put in there, other than what would be incentivized.
Okay, so is it a term that's used like nationwide? Like if I was to say, oh, there's a town center in Dallas at XYZ place?
Yeah, I
And,
think you'll
this is
see
me being
some.
dumb. I don't know. I've never heard that term.
Oh, you'll see some around. I know there's some in the Dallas area. Lincoln Square.
Is Utica and Tulsa, is that a town center?
I don't think so. I think it's too old to be considered a town center. I think it predated town centers.
Okay. Well, if anybody knows of a famous one, feel free to chime in. Okay, so that was the first thing. Okay, so can the $5 million in entertainment be used in conjunction with a Norman Forward project, or like adjacent to any Norman Forward project there?
No, an exhibit to the project plan, and I don't think it's not attached to the development agreement, but it's an exhibit to the project plan, and it identifies exactly where the town center is, and so it's roughly between Crest and the hotels south of Embassy Suites. And so it'll be close, but it won't be directly adjacent to, and could not be used for the recreation facility.
Okay, so, what if it's, and that's only if it's under the entertainment heading and not the retail heading?
No, retail or entertainment, not all has to be located in that area to be incentivized. We didn't want to incentivize a project here, a project there. We wanted it to be something cohesive, because that's where you get that walkability and that urban design.
Okay. So, originally, we were trying to go back and look at what the original intent was under the first development agreement. Whose responsibility was it to come up with a regional draw?
It was part of the lifestyle center objective, I believe. I think it also was in maybe some of the more general objectives in the original project plan, but I think mostly it was specific to the lifestyle center and the conference center cultural facility components.
Okay, so I saw here some of the stuff you wrote about, but basically, so the onus was on the developer and now it's on the city. Am I understanding that correctly? Because the Norman Forward projects just became the regional draw?
Well, it depends on what they develop, I would think, whether they get something that's also a regional draw, but the recreation facilities could certainly serve as a regional draw as well.
Okay, and for the entertainment, Kate, said something that was, she said if I have $5,001,001, is there any threshold that they have to meet to get that 5 million as far as, okay, 5,000,001's not gonna cut it because we're not just giving away free money. So it needs to be like a $25 million project and then you'll get the 5 million? Where
No,
we're
it
not paying
doesn't,
for the whole thing?
it doesn't set forth a match like that. It just uses these criteria that are set forth in the town center portion of the development agreement.
So potentially, we could be just writing someone a $5 million check and paying for their new fun thing.
Well, only if it meets all these criteria. So it'd have to be someone that bought land or signed a longer-term lease of at least 3 years. And the development that it's being used for has to show all of these things that are listed.
Right, but I'm saying that potentially they wouldn't have any investment in their own project. It would be something the city just built for them.
The city wouldn't build anything for them.
We paid for it to be built.
It would be an incentive, yes. And that's the same way it was under the original project plan, where it could go towards infrastructure, it could go towards tenant improvements, things like that.
Okay, but have we done that to date? I mean, is that something that typically happens in Norman, that we can just, if somebody comes with hey, I want to build like a roller derby rink, but since I don't have the money for that, how about you give it to me? It's going to be about $5 million?
No, we've never done a retail incentive in Norman.
Okay. So that makes it new to Norman, I guess. I'm going to let somebody else talk for a minute, and then I'll come back to some of these others.
Councilmember Bierman?
Okay, so, first, I have to say, I do share Councilmember Patron's concern about not having a minimum project value. Because as we've even stated tonight, this kind of checklist is not a minimum requirement, because someone can still come to council even if they don't meet all of these requirements. So if the only requirement they don't meet is that they must purchase land or sign a lease of at least 3 years, then they can still come to council and ask for it. And I think there should be some disqualifying factors. And I think minimum project value is certainly one of them. So that, which kind of leads me to the second point that I kind of jotted down, is I'm a little frustrated about the utility or usefulness of public hearings if there's really no changes we can make to this plan.
You can certainly make changes to the plan. It requires a supermajority to override what the statutory TIF committee reviewed. But because this has impacted all of these other development agreements, and the direction was to try and settle all those outstanding obligations, it would be something that I would have to go back to the other parties to get this agreement amended.
Right. And so I really wish that some of this kind of discussion of the actual agreement took place in a public setting before it went to the statutory review committee. Because kind of once it went to the statutory review committee, I could answer questions about it, but then I'd have to say that, well, we can change it, but it's a higher threshold, and it just becomes a lot more complicated. And so I do wish some of this stuff had kind of come out a little bit earlier in the process. But I want to kind of go back, because I got a couple questions about how we got to this point, with kind of the basic question, because I've even gotten this question, is what was it exactly that staff was asked to do? And the second is, what was our first ask or offer in the negotiations, and kind of what were the major trade points? What were they totally unwilling to compromise on? What were we totally unwilling to compromise on? And so on. Because I think that having some of that history, which a lot of it happened in different settings than this, this kind of puts all the puzzle pieces together for people who are only kind of hearing reports about the process throughout and not getting a full kind of top to bottom picture.
Okay. So Bryce, if you could go to the slide that says council actions to date. This is really what guided our negotiations, these resolutions. The first one requesting the statutory TIF committee review the use of cultural facility funds for a recreational complex. And then in talking with council in February and March, we began negotiating. We really were negotiating in January, although the MOU was adopted in March. We've had weekly phone calls all these months, sometimes more than once a week. I'm trying to remember what my first offer was. It was a severe cut to lifestyle center incentives. I think it was down to 1.5 million, something like that, because I knew they wouldn't go for eliminating it altogether. And that seemed the easiest way to solve the problem.
Kind of catch you. Why do you think that they wouldn't have been, if they know that they're not going to build a lifestyle center, why would they not be okay with getting rid of the clawback and trade for the incentive?
I think they feel like they can build something out there. They've got debt on that land, and I think they feel like they could have a viable project, but in today's retail market, that it would require some assistance. And so that was a huge negotiating point. And then, as I've said before, the public infrastructure, to me, I understand citizens have a discomfort with using TIF funds for developers, and so public infrastructure seemed like a good place to put some of that money, especially considering those projects have gone so far over budget, and in some cases far beyond the original scope of the projects. And so that was something that I was arguing for, and really because of that January 2019 resolution, I did not consider just eliminating the cultural facility funds altogether, because there had been direction already to consider using those funds for a recreational complex. Now, in January, you all were looking at the North Base property still. And that property had higher development costs, similar acquisition costs, but it was recognized that because of those higher costs, it would need some additional funding. And so the developer, I think, came in February and sent a letter suggesting maybe you ought to look at locating these within the increment district instead of at North Base. And so that's how that component reached the final agreement.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Trying to remember, sorry.
Yeah, I just was kind of what our kind of offers were back and forth, kind of
Yeah.
how we got to this point.
And I don't have all that with me, but I know I started with a severe cut to lifestyle center incentives because that was the thing that council had the most discomfort with.
Okay. And I have one last question, then I'll turn it back over. Is there any room in the language that's being presented tonight and that was passed by the Statutory Review Committee to use economic development funds for land acquisition for Norman Forward projects in UNP?
No.
Why not?
Economic development has been looked at from the inception of this project as quality jobs and bringing quality employment opportunities to Norman. And so although under this agreement, NEDC will not have that corporate center land anymore, they will have the advanced manufacturing center land, and they've taken a severe cut in the funding available under the project plan, primarily because they were able to sell that corporate center Section 1 property. And so the little bit of money that was put towards economic development is really available to pay the interest costs, to pay for the incentive for Emmy that was approved by council in 2016, and things related to quality jobs.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, council members? Okay. Figuring out the buttons, by the way. All right, Councilor Patron.
Okay. How much do we actually owe in total under development agreements or outstanding contracts?
Well, I mean, there's different positions on that. Obviously, we've obligated to spend the traffic and roadway improvements. We've got agreements that address the potential for lifestyle center incentives, which those deadlines haven't come yet. So I would say that would be money we could potentially owe. But the argument from the developer has been and will be that all of these things didn't happen in a vacuum, that there was consideration for a number of different actions based on implementation of this project plan, and all of these agreements reference those prior transactions. And that includes things like selling Ruby Grant Park to the city at about half of the market value, donating Legacy Park to the city, donating the conference center land to the city, which enabled John Q. Hammonds to build that and then keep it rather than sell it back to the city. So it depends on how you look at it, but I would say the argument is that all of these agreements are tied to a broader sense of consideration for the project plan implementation.
Okay, well, without the broader sense of consideration, what do we actually owe? Like, which ones of these development agreements have not been fulfilled? How much do we owe?
There's money in development agreement number 3. I'm not gonna be able to call the number to mind. It's around 2 million or so, authorized and obligated for, public art and, enhanced landscaping. Development agreement number 4 has been fulfilled with Rock Creek Bridge. Development agreement number 5 deals with the lifestyle center incentives. So that's 8.25 million there. There's language in, and I think it's development agreement number 5, but I'd have to look to be sure, regarding the cultural facility funding. And then there's development agreement number 6, which authorizes a certain amount of money. I think it's up to $770,000 for an incentive for quality jobs with the ME project. And then there's an economic development agreement that authorized the expenditure of all 8.25 million, I think, of those economic development funds. And we've spent around 4 million.
Okay, and what about roads?
Roads, we've done almost the 11.55 million outlined in the project plan, so not a whole lot there.
Okay, so 2 million public art and landscaping, 770 in economic development, you said? Something else. And then the lifestyle center incentives, should they come and have a, with a project that's approved by council?
Right.
And,
8.25 million.
okay, so maybe less than 5 million?
No, the lifestyle center is 8.25 million.
Right, but
by
that's
itself.
dependent on them coming forward with the like, there's not one
Correct.
that's not, we haven't not upheld our end of the bargain as far as it's something in the works.
Yes, if they don't come with a project by 2026,
Mm-hmm,
then yes, that's true.
okay. So less than 5 million, it sounds like.
I think it's a little more than 5, given the economic development agreement piece, but I'd have to go back and
And,
calculate that.
and some change maybe. So with that, we have 5 million in the entertainment thing alone. So I'm trying to figure out, with the road projects, if I'm understanding correctly, everything that wasn't, anything above 11.5 was the developer's responsibility, not the city's, but not the Robinson Crossing, that's new to this.
No, that was included in that list as well. But when you look at that development agreement and that preliminary budget, we have almost doubled that budget with about half of the projects. So we have been way, way over budget and more than what was contemplated back in 2006, 2007, when that agreement was entered into.
So do they not have any obligation on roads anymore, the developer?
They have the obligation in development agreement number 1, yes. I think there's an argument that the projects, what's envisioned now is at least different, and certainly in cost, and in some cases in scope, than what was envisioned back then.
Okay, well, under development agreement number 1, how much do they owe in roads?
It's whatever exceeded the 11.55 budget, so it would be the 5.02 million, if that were enforceable.
Well, I mean, if we're gonna go back, if they're gonna make the argument that development agreement number 1 and all this is a big, long plan, then it's enforceable. I mean, they can't have it both ways, right?
Like I said, I don't know what a court would do with that, but I think there's an argument there that these projects have changed significantly. And so I don't know what they would end up owing.
Okay, so they would still owe on the roads. Anything else that they would have the clawback on the lifestyle center if they didn't bring it, and that was how much?
I think it was 2.4 million for the frontage road and 5 million for the legacy park, so somewhere around $8 million, 8.2 maybe.
Okay. And is there anything else that they haven't fulfilled their responsibility
No,
besides roads and,
and we haven't asked for the roads. We haven't been in a position to ask for those.
Right.
So I wouldn't say they haven't fulfilled that, but,
Why haven't we been, what do you mean by that? Can you explain that?
Huh?
I didn't understand that. We haven't been in a position?
yeah, we haven't reached the point yet where we're letting those projects and would be in a position to ask for the funding of those projects. That would be at a point when they were bid. All those
Okay.
projects are in the design phase.
Am I understanding that it's the same roads that now we're offering to pay for?
Mm-hmm.
Did we offer for them to pay for them? Or that we would just forgive them?
Trying to remember. I don't think in our initial offer that I think we put some money in traffic and roadway improvements. I don't recall how much. But like I said earlier, that was really looking at the delta between the authorized project cost and how much money we thought we would have as of June 30th and council's direction at that time and the overall discomfort with the concept of lifestyle center incentives. So putting those tax dollars to public infrastructure seemed a better way to go.
So if this council decided not to pass this, because they felt like, well, why wouldn't we just keep the developer on the hook for the 5 million in roads? Keep the, if they're not willing to trade lifestyle incentives for the clawback and just let that project go away like apparently they feel like it should, then we'll go ahead and let them build something. I mean, that something's better than nothing. I mean, according to the spirit of the agreement from the beginning, if we were trying to create more sales tax, as what this says, for major retail development, creating a regional draw and creation of a lifestyle center in the southern portion. I mean, if we want this to mean anything for all of the money that we've put in it, if we just decided to not pass this, do you think that it would end up costing this council less money than what this?
I think we would still spend every bit of what we've collected, and then the apportionment would continue until probably December of 2020 when it was fully funded.
Yeah, and then it's
So, I mean,
done.
it would be the impact to the budget this year, the impact to the budget next year. In addition to, whether or not, I don't think we can count on the clawback. I think something will get built out there, so I don't think we can count that as money as in the bank. But yeah, I mean, we could stick with the original project plan, sure.
And then if we were to vote this down, and then could we just decide to potentially exercise our statutory authority from the beginning and say, you know what, we're going to remove the cultural facility, or we're going to decide that Robinson Crossing, is a standalone project that we want to complete? I mean, at that point, we could take the reins like what the Local Development Act says that we can.
The cultural facility is a major project plan amendment, so that would have to go back through the statutory TIF process. I'm not sure how much heartburn the other parties would have with that, whether or not that was an important benefit of the bargain to them, I don't know. But the reason we didn't go in that direction, as I said, is from council's direction back in January about using those funds for a recreational complex. So that's why we moved in that direction.
But it's not a permanent, just because council said that back in January doesn't mean that we can't decide to go in that direction now.
Sure, you could change your mind, sure.
Okay. And I guess maybe my question is for, I mean, if you know, it's great, but maybe it's Anthony. I'm wondering, well, actually, the first thing, that Norman Forward project, you said, I didn't really understand. Not sufficient, you said. Yeah, you said the city will use Norman Forward for these projects, 22.5 million, and then you said that's not sufficient.
Oh, in my presentation. Yeah, I think those are two projects in particular that we've known probably don't have sufficient budgets. The ad hoc committee has begun meeting, the design team has begun working on those, and so that will be determined more precisely in the next few months, I think. But I think these are projects that especially had some shortfalls, and I think that's part of what led us to this point, including them in the TIF, is because the cost of land acquisition was not part of the Norman Forward budget, even when it was going to be a north base. And so that acquisition, land development cost really impacts those budgets negatively when they're already probably going to be pretty short.
Okay. So what does that mean for this agreement if it's not sufficient?
Well, that's why we've got the $2.7 million in construction supplements, and that's why we included funding for the land acquisition, so that didn't have to come out of those projects' budgets.
Okay, maybe my question's for Anthony now. Thank you. Hi.
That question, or?
No, I think, on other Norman Forward projects that we have thus far, have we, supplied any other funding to them for, and I know that most of them we haven't had to buy land, and I know that we have land throughout the city that we could potentially use for these projects, but have we, supplied $2 million to any other projects to purchase land for Norman Forward projects? So that it didn't come out of their Norman
Within the
Forward budget?
softball, football facility project, there are land acquisition funds.
In what? The soft?
Yeah,
at Reeves?
I'm probably terming it the wrong thing, but it's the adult, relocating the adult football and softball facilities from Reeves Park to the site that has been now identified on Franklin Road.
Okay, how
And
much
there are
were
land
the,
acquisition costs, and we're always anticipated land acquisition cost in that project.
okay, how much was that land acquisition cost?
I believe it was like $500,000 budgeted.
Okay. And then any other ones have land acquisition costs? that were-
Not to my remembrance.
How big is that piece of land, at 500,000?
Judd can help me out here, but I believe it's about 40 acres.
40 acres for $500,000?
Yes. And I will say that I'm speaking for Judd and the other project managers, I would think that they would say that that was probably not sufficient budget, but that's what was budgeted.
Do you think we'll be using that whole 40 acres for flag football?
That would be up to the ad hoc group. I can't speak to that, really.
I can ask Judd when we're finished with this part. Has any other, and I guess, did that 500,000 come out of their Norman Forward funds for that project?
Yes.
Okay. And,
Your question was, were there other Norman Fork
right,
projects?
no, I'm
for
asking,
land
I'm just making
acquisition?
sure I'm doing apples to apples here. On the, and I appreciate you have known, the construction supplement, this says 2.735 million is part of this. So these two Norman Forward projects would get a additional 2.735 million. Have we provided any other private funds, so non-Norman Forward funds, to any other Norman Forward projects?
Not to my remembrance, but I will say that that was a major portion of the consideration of both the Norman Forward Oversight, Citizens Financial Oversight Board, and their recommendation to council that you move forward with this site, and the TIF Oversight Committee's recommendation to council. They want those additional funds to be supplementing those projects, and that's why they recommended it.
I'd like extra funds in all the projects. I'm just wondering if we've done that for anybody else, any other
No,
project.
within Norman Forward, council appropriated additional funds for the indoor tennis facility, but to
For the
my
air conditioner?
remembrance-
For the air conditioner, is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah.
And the additional steel costs and those sorts of things.
Okay, so we haven't done, though, any major, this is getting an extra $4.7 million for these two projects. And have any of the other Norman Forward projects had their budgets cut?
Yes.
So the
Budgets
original.
cut, no. I would say that the scope of the projects has been altered to keep them within their budgets,
Within, or they've had to pare back?
within.
Okay, so, and then some didn't have budgets at all, like the senior center.
Correct. There were no, at the time Norman Ford was adopted, there were no budgeted funds for a senior center.
Okay, so every other group can reasonably expect that the original budget that they have, they're going to be able to use it under Norman Forward.
That's been
Like-
council's direction to date.
Like Griffin, NYSA, they're gonna get an indoor soccer facility.
No, that's, again, the scope of some of the projects have been cut back to keep them within their budgeted costs.
Okay, so they're still gonna have 10 million to use.
Yes.
Okay, and same thing for softball and baseball at Reeves. They've still got 10 million for their master plan.
I don't believe that's the right figure, but they will be within their budget.
Okay, I think it is, because we had to pass it last week. But anyway, so, but we haven't added to anybody's, and I think, is there anybody in here that knows anything about Norman Forward budget? I'll get your help in a minute. You sat on that board, huh? That'd be great. Okay, so maybe you, I just want to make sure that we're not pitting one kid against another and saying, hey, your project's so important that we're willing to give that project 5 million more than what it was budgeted. Where this one over here, you can't even realize what was planned at the ballot.
That's exactly right. And I would say that the reason for that is that you're putting it in University North Park, which has these funds available to attract a regional draw project. And council has determined these to be regional draw projects that qualify for that supplemental funding.
If we pass it, we will have.
Yes, ma'am.
That's when the determination would happen, is
Yes, ma'am.
after we would pass this.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
If you need a break, we do have
I'd
another
love a break.
question at this point. Thank you. All right. Councilmember Scott.
Okay. Just go ahead and stay there if you don't mind. Appreciate Councilmember Trone's due diligence. I think we're getting a little bit in the weeds. However, my concern is what happens, because she mentioned multiple times, if we pass it, if we don't pass it, what does that mean for our budget?
Yeah,
If we don't.
I'm glad you asked that because
That's my
that
biggest
is my overriding concern. What we get out of passing this is that we get to stop apportioning the sales tax to the University of North Park.
Exactly.
Fund. That overrides everything in my mind. It's $4 million to this fiscal year's budget. It's about $2 million to next fiscal year's budget
Thank you.
that we don't have to apportion, and that overrides everything in my mind.
Just wanted a reminder of why we were doing this and putting ourselves through this in the first place.
Yes, ma'am.
And then I guess also what would that mean if it were not to pass? Not only, so if our budget, we would have a deficit in this fiscal year.
Yes, ma'am.
So what does that mean for our services?
Again, as we discussed previously, difficult decisions will have to be made.
I understand.
Services will have to be cut. Fund balances that we have built up will be drawn down. There will be major ramifications if the budget that was built on the ending of the apportionment of sales tax is not accomplished.
Okay, thank you for the reminder.
Councilmember Bierman.
So, well, Anthony, it's okay. I was trying to formulate a question, and I thought I had it fully formed, and I don't have it as formed as I would like. I was trying to listen and form it, so I will pass on if anyone else has.
Councilmember Patron.
I have a follow-up to Alex's question, Councilmember Scott's question. So what happens in the general fund budget when that particular line item isn't fully funded? And I guess my, what's common in my, or recent in my memory is Westwood Golf Course. When it has been in the red, how does that get paid?
There have been some years when the Westwood Enterprise Fund, our special revenue fund, was subsidized from the general fund. And I believe the last fiscal year, and I could look it up, but I believe it was like $200,000.
Okay, and it's coming from, the enterprise fund gets subsidized from the general
The
fund?
shortfall between the revenues of the Westwood Fund and the expenses of the Westwood Fund were subsidized from the general fund in some fiscal years.
Okay, so, and this is definitely in the weeds, it's just an example of what I'm trying to understand. So when we budget for next year, in the general fund, and it's short for Westwood, it's because it's,
Projected revenues would be short of projected expenditures.
and the enterprise fund is a section of the general fund?
No, the Westwood Fund is a separate fund. It's a special revenue fund.
Okay, so can capital funds be transferred to the general fund?
Not for operations. Remember, the capital fund is an earmarked sales tax for its primary revenues. It's an earmarked sales tax by the voter-approved ordinance, can only be used for capital projects. We squeeze the turnip, if you will, for some operational costs that are dedicated to capital projects, like the cost of the salaries of the capital project engineers that the capital fund pays for. But in my opinion, we're kind of squeezing that term as much as it can be legally squeezed. The general fund is a standalone fund that, that's where our flexibility lies to do other things. But the general fund is the fund that is most fiscally stressed. And that's where we have our concern. And remember that the sales tax that we are apportioning is not an expenditure, it's a revenue to pay for all of those expenditures. And if that revenue does not come in, that's where I'm saying difficult decisions on the expenditure side will have to be made.
I had another question on, just left me. I've forgotten when I think of it all. My brain's getting a little tired.
Any other questions, council members? Okay, Councilmember Bierman.
Anthony, at what point in this fiscal year do we kind of reach that make or break point for these funds? Is it the mid-year review, or, I mean, in other words, at what financial point do we need to figure out whether or not these funds are coming back into the general fund or are going to sit until the natural
If
life
all
of
of
the
our
TIF ends?
projections are exactly right, we would extinguish our available fund balances sometime around February or March. And then we would have to make some real cuts.
Okay. That's really all I had on that question. Just wanted a timeline.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Holman.
Anthony, could you go over some of the parameters of what can existing TIF funds be spent on in the entire city of Norman? So money that's in the bank in the TIF account right now for UMP TIF, what can it be used for? Can it be used for things like funding CART or the public transit system? Can it be used?
No, sir.
Can we use it to
Under
pay
the
for-
project plan ordinance, authorized projects with the University North Park TIF Fund can only be used for authorized projects in University North Park TIF Fund.
If we reject this deal, can we use TIF funds to fund our public transit system?
No, sir.
Can we use TIF funds to fund police or fire services in Norman?
No, sir.
Thank you. That's all the question I have right now.
All right, Councilmember Patron.
So a follow-up on Stevens, if they were to be returned back to the taxing jurisdictions because the TIF has been closed, for instance, if we were to remove the cultural facility and then close out the TIF, what happens to those funds then? Are our hands still tied that we can't use them for anything else except for what would have been in a TIF plan?
So if the project plan were amended such that there were no authorized projects, and all of the funds that have been collected and apportioned to date were returned to all of the taxing jurisdictions, including the city's sales tax, then yes, I believe that you could. Then it would just become sales taxes of the cities that have been collected for their various purposes in the general fund and the capital fund.
Okay. And is it possible that we could still change the agreement, change this, the proposed agreement, take away the giveaways, take out the giveaways, so like the 5 million entertainment, and then still be able to balance the budget? I mean, do we have to do all of this? Do we have to give away $17 million basically to be able to get back our increment
I
money?
don't like the term giveaway, but.
Well, if you have a $5 million project, we'll give it to you.
Well.
It's fun.
Again, I think you're paying for public improvements to the greatest extent. But again, if you decided that you're not going to do any projects, then yes, the funds could be returned to the various taxing jurisdictions.
But what I'm saying is, what if we just decide that we're not gonna do the entertainment piece and get rid of the cultural facility piece, but that we are gonna allow the Norman Ford projects to go forward there? I mean, can we still, what
I
I'm
think the
asking you is,
council could make that decision with a supermajority vote that overrides the recommendation of the Statutory Review Committee. But I don't think that would relieve you of the potential legal liability that's best left to the city attorney to address. But I think that those contractual agreements would still be in place and would be subject to litigation.
I agree with you on the development agreements. I do believe there is a contractual agreement to things that have wet ink on them that we have started. But what I'm asking is for balancing the budget. We just need the increment money back. The other things have nothing to do with balancing the budget.
That's correct.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions, council members? All right, seeing none, I think we're done for tonight. Thank you. This is the study session.